Welcome to Channel 24. The EU is now urging China to pressure Putin to end his war against Ukraine, a move that many see as a sign of Europe's limited leverage. Brussels admits relations with Beijing have reached a watershed moment. Meanwhile, in Washington, the rhetoric is shifting. Speaker Mike Johnson says the US will not get dragged into the conflict, but insists it will act from a position of strength. But what does that strength mean, and where is it actually directed? Joining me now in the studio is Professor PeterEltsov, historian, expert on international security affairs at the National Defense University. Peter, hi.
Hi, great to see you, Natalia. The president and the United States government are in a difficult situation right now because one of his biggest slogans during his election campaign was no war. And he already involved himself, like actively in the war between Israel and Iran. And now he clearly switched his mind and decided to help Ukraine. In the beginning, he was saying that he was going to solve the conflict in 24 hours and so forth. So, I mean, he has a complicated situation because some of his base is now unhappy with that because he clearly was against like any kind of involvement in any wars. Even you could say there's a kind of an isolationist agenda. I mean, he is clearly mad at Putin. He realized that Putin is not planning to negotiate. He doesn't seem to even be wanting to meet with Trump. So I think the position of strength today, actually what it means is selling arms to Ukraine via Europe. So if Europe pays, if Germany and other European countries pay for the American arms, it's just going to provide arms galore. And from Trump's perspective as a businessman, this is a kind of a great solution, right? He's just going to basically make money for American companies. Germany seems to have agreed to pay to take a large chunk of those expenses. Will Europe have enough money for that for the long term? That's a good question. But I think at this point, this is the only position of strength which the United States under Trump is ready to provide.
But why is Europe right now asking for help from China? Basically, I mean, that's a huge continent, and they just asking China to help to somehow persuade Putin to end this war.
Well, China definitely has a very heavy weight in the international relations.
But that was, I'm sorry, Peter, I'm sorry, but that was always. There was always like this. But how they reached to the moment, the Brussels, to ask Beijing for help?
Well, I wouldn't say, I would correct you a little bit, not always. I would say it's the last decade then China has become so powerful, or maybe decade and a half in international relations, because China would definitely have a weight if they were to say Putin. Some people argue that Russia has become a kind of a client state for China. If China were to change their mind, they definitely could influence Putin because Russia is dependent tremendously on China. Just a few years ago, I edited an investigative report by a Russian journalist who is now hiding somewhere in the West because he basically argued that a lot of Siberian businesses today in lumber, in oil and gas, are fully controlled by Chinese money and Chinese businesses. So, I mean, it makes sense, the question to ask for help from China. The question, of course, will they do it? And I don't think, they're going to play some kind of an intricate game there. They're not going to tell Putin to stop the war. I don't think so, unless it somehow affects their own interest.
But still, towards whom this strength will be, directed? That's what Mike Johnson said, yes.
Oh, well, they want China to help, but the threat, I mean, there is no real threat they can pose to Putin. Putin not, I mean, clearly
I'm
the
sorry.
United States.
Peter, I mean, what strength of Mike Johnson that said about the strength, towards whom he's going to direct this strength of the United States? Because we're talking about in Ukrainian television all the time that.
Well, he's saying towards Russia, of course, but I mean, it could be, it's largely a political rhetoric. What kind of, I mean, what can they do? They're not going to go to war with Russia, clearly. So the only thing they can do is provide Ukraine with arms, and particularly if Europeans pay for that. So, like, other than that, they can't really do anything. I mean, they don't have leverage against Putin, particularly if Putin is exactly indirectly supported by China, Iran, and now also, since recently, by North Korea, who are ready to fight. It was pretty much the North Koreans who helped to get back the Kursk region for Russia. So, I mean, I think it's largely political rhetoric.
And, you know, this week we had a third round, of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia in Istanbul, in Turkey. And the foreign minister of Turkey, he said that there is a possibility that there will be a summit, Zelensky-Putin. Of course, Kremlin has rejected this idea in a few hours. But still, from your perspective, is that summit of both leaders in a state of war is possible? And what could it potentially bring to us?
So I definitely do believe in the role of individuals. If you look at the end of the Cold War, the first meeting between Reagan and Gorbachev was a disaster. They, I think, walked away from each other after talking for a short period of time. But at that time, there was a political will to do something. So I do believe that miracles happen when individuals meet, and charismatic individuals, that they can make decisions. But in this case, I think it's very unlikely that something very significant will happen, because we know that I think President Zelensky is more likely to make serious concessions to achieve ceasefire. I don't think Putin is in any kind of a negotiation position. What shows, like everything from the recent political rhetoric, he recently said that all of Ukraine is ours. He also said, I think it was in the St. Petersburg summit, he again repeated his story that the Ukrainians and Russians are the same people, and in this sense, all of Ukraine is ours. As I said, personally, I think that he wants all of Ukraine, except maybe for Galiciana. And definitely he wants all big all big Ukrainian cities or east of the Dnieper River, including, of course, Odessa, Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, and all of that. So this is a big task. And Medinsky, his main negotiator, the so-called historian, who is notorious for his disbanding the so-called historical myths about Russia, he said that Russia is ready to fight for another 20 years, and compared the Russian-Ukrainian war with the Northern War of Peter the Great, which did last for 21 years from, I believe, 1700 to 1721. So all signs show that that Russia wants to continue the war and get more land. So, I mean, I'm sorry to say, though, those pessimistic things, but I don't see any desire from the Russian government or from Putin personally, from his circle, and from his representative, Vladimir Medinsky, to do any concessions. No even desire to have a ceasefire, which Trump has been calling for.
You know, Peter, I see some tendency with when almost every international expert in my studio, they are apologizing for pessimistic view of this war, saying, I don't see any signs that Russia is going to stop this war. But for me, as a Ukrainian sitting here in Kyiv, I don't see any signs of stopping this war either. But Peter, you know, from you as a historian, I would like to talk with you about the broader and bigger picture, to what extent do you believe the West played a role, even unintentionally, in provoking Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Have you studied this question in depth?
Yes, and I actually teach about it. It's a very big question, and there are two sides of this question. So one is about the role of individuals, how much this war is Putin's war, like another Russian president would have studied it. And another question, yes, what did the West do allegedly to provoke this war? There is a large group of individuals, I'll start with the second part of this question. There is a large group of individuals in the West who do blame the West. And actually what is remarkable, quite a few old Cold War warriors. For example, I know personally the last real ambassador in Moscow in the Soviet Union, Jack Matlock, who is 95 years old now. So he was during the second Reagan's term, the ambassador in Moscow. And I happened just a few years ago to be on a panel with him at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He 100% accepted the Russian story. So he blames the West, the expansion of NATO. He says that the West interfered in the Russian elections in the 90s. He calls Crimea sort of historic Russia. He says that Russia was humiliated after the Cold War. To me, psychologically, like I had dinner with this man and we had a very nice discussion. Psychologically, to me, these people, he feels that his life, the main achievement of his life was to end the Cold War. And he somehow, I think personally at this old age, feels that basically the main achievement of his life was screwed up by politicians after him and his, of course, boss, Ronald Reagan. So same was with Henry Kissinger. You remember that he pretty much accepted the annexation of Crimea. Then he had all these ideas of territorial concessions. Just before, shortly before his death, he kind of admitted that he may have been wrong in some of his assessments. So then there is a very influential trend in political science and the field of international relations, the so-called the realists, who blame the West for the expansion of NATO, for the involvement in the war in former Yugoslavia, for the EU for an attempt to accept Ukraine to the European Union, then for the so-called color revolutions in the former Soviet Union. And of course, the biggest person there is John Mearsheimer, who is this famous professor at the University of Chicago, who's been for years saying that Ukraine is the West's fault. In fact, he was the one who wrote that famous or infamous piece in Foreign Affairs right after the annexation of Crimea. And the title of the piece is Why Ukraine is the West's Fault. So yes, there is a trend. You go to conferences of political scientists, there is a big trend of those people talking about that. And it's also, there are public debates. For example, you can find in YouTube a very interesting debate between Mike McFaul, the former ambassador in Moscow, who is completely on the other side of the fence and blames Russia for everything, and John Mearsheimer. So my opinion, I'll tell you, I definitely belong more to the camp of Mike McFaul, and I think that you can, it's the same like, can you blame the Versailles Treaty, which ended the World War I and allegedly humiliated Germany for Hitler? So can you do that? I guess some historians do say that, well, Versailles Treaty was not fair to Germany and so forth, but you still cannot justify the actions of Hitler. It's the same logic, like if you say, when a rapist said, oh, well, this woman
provoked me.
Provoked me, exactly. She wore a miniskirt or something. So that's the same kind of logic. So I strongly disagree with that, but I have to admit that there is a very powerful group of individuals in the West who do convey this kind of explanation. And the first part of the question, when I said, we discussed it with you before, whether it's a Russian war or Putin's war. And here I'm conflicted. Yes, I do think the Russian people support it today. And actually, the most recent Levada poll says that, yes, overwhelming majority of the citizens of Russia support the war. At the same time, Putin, I think, did make that decision pretty much himself, because according to some reports, even Lavrov was not aware until the beginning of the full-scale war how it's going to proceed. So would another person would have started it? Possibly not on that scale. So that's a question of the role of an individual.
Okay, so you think that Putinism will die with Putin?
I do think so, because there is no, think about it, even Marxism, Leninism, soon after the death of Stalin, which I would never compare like Surkov did. He once compared, I think, Putinism to Marxism in terms of power. This is ridiculous. Putin is clearly neither Marx nor Lenin. But even Marxism, Leninism existed for how long? 70 odd years in practice in the Soviet Union. So I don't think that Russia has an ideology which is powerful enough to exist for a long time, like after Putin, maybe a decade or so. So it will go away with Putin. I'm absolutely, positive about that.
Yeah, I could not disagree with you more, Peter, because what I see, I don't see any protest.
You think?
Yeah, of Russians protesting against this war. And as you said, Levada Center is saying that they don't want to stop this war. Why? Well, some of the Russians or some of the experts saying because they just, as long as Putin started it, they don't want Russia lose this fight, this war. So for me as a Ukrainian, it's very, very hard as a citizen of Ukraine to understand this logic. Because, I mean, you see what's happening in Ukraine right now. We're full of a protest against one law. And so we're completely different people. And I don't see any signs that it's going to fade away in 10 years or even maybe 100 years, maybe so. But I don't see any signs.
But think about, as I said, an example, I mean, what was the support for Stalin and even under Khrushchev, still the communist system and everything, how long it existed after that, for like another 30-something years after the death of Stalin. So I do think that there is, I hear what you're saying, but it seems to me there is a potential. Think about the election when Boris Nadezhdin tried to run for the president, and they completely banned him from running.
Absolutely.
The only thing he said that he was against the war. That's it. And they were so scared to allow him to run, because think of the embarrassment for the government. He would have lost to Putin if they had let him run. There's no question. But what if like 10 or 15 million people would put votes for him? That would be a tremendous embarrassment. And I think there is that kind of potential. And in the theory of insurgency and revolution, you don't need the majority of the population. You need maybe 5-10 million people, a very active minority. And today, this is all completely suppressed. You say that there are no protests in Russia. Like, of course, the last protest on Bolotnaya was brutally suppressed. So I'm a little bit more optimistic, cautiously optimistic about the future of Russia after Putin.